Good morning. I hope you can all hear me. You want to hear me? My name is Jim Roberts. I've been coming here for quite a while, but I've been around recently. I've got a side hustle, as they call it these days, as a chaplain on cruises, and we've just come back off a long cruise. My apologies for being around the world while you've been here. So anyway, just thought I'd throw that in one. It's lovely to be back with you here. And we're doing a whole series on the Holy Spirit. We had Easter a few weeks ago, and we're now leading up to the next liturgical church event, which is the remembrance of the giving of the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost. And between those two events, the church is doing a whole series on the work of the Holy Spirit. And the first week, we looked at the fruit of the Holy Spirit, the virtues and characteristics of people who have the Holy Spirit. And then we've been doing a series on the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And last week I wasn't here because I was somewhere else. King Gerald was talking of the gift of prophecy, and this week I've been given the gift of speaking in tongues. No, the talk of and because of the way I am, I can't just parachute in. I need to put it in context. So I hope you'll bear with me, and I hope this works. No, it doesn't work. On the next slide, please. This is what I'm supposed to be speaking on, the spiritual gift of speaking in tongues. Now, I don't know what that phrase brings in your mind, what idea you have about that, but there's just a few things I'd just like to clarify first. And again, please. First of all, we need to clarify, first of all, the gift of the Holy Spirit. When somebody becomes a Christian, the distant Christ who lived 2,000 years ago, 3,000 miles away, becomes real and present in the life of a believer. And that is done by the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God. And He comes to live within us and brings us to faith and makes Jesus real. All Christians, by definition, have the Holy Spirit given to them. That's what makes us a Christian. You can't be a Christian without the work and influence of the Holy Spirit. Everybody in the world is made in the image of God. There is something divine and godlike about human beings, which is why everybody should be treated with respect and dignity, no matter who they are and what they're like. All human beings are made in the image of God, but those who seek to follow Jesus Christ also are given the Spirit of God to help us live the kind of lives Jesus wants us to. So that's first of all the gift of the Spirit. Good news, we've all been influenced and affected. The Holy Spirit is working in us. In fact, the Holy Spirit is working throughout the world. The Holy Spirit is not limited to the church. The Holy Spirit is working throughout the world. But perhaps people who come to church are those who are perhaps more responsive, aware that the Holy Spirit is working in them. So that's the first thing I want to say, the gift of the Spirit. So Martin, if you still away the next one, please. The gifts of the Spirit. Now again, I want to clarify. The word gift is a misleading term, and I personally don't like it. It translates the word charis, which means gift, or grace, actually means grace. And spiritual gifts is the neuter plural of grace. Grace things, or some people say gracelets. Just like a bracelet, you have a bracelet. And that tells us something about the nature of what the Holy Spirit does in us, because it comes from the word grace. Something undeserved, not earned by us. So the spiritual gifts are grace things given to us by the Holy Spirit. And so, quotation there, to each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. All Christians are charismatic. Some of us are rheumatic. All Christians are charismatic theologically. Other Christians and churches are charismatic culturally. A cultural charismatic church tends to be a loud one with people waving their hands in the air. That's culturally charismatic. But theologically, all Christians and all churches are charismatic to the extent that that verse is applied. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. That is a definition of being charismatic. Hey! To each one is given the manifestation of the Spirit. It does not say to each man. It does not say to each adult. It does not say to each good-looking, intelligent person. To each one of us is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. So we all have a part to play. Now, not all of us will have a part to play publicly in front on a Sunday. I can't play the guitar or sing to save my life. But others can, they'll come to the front. But all of us have a part to play in the body of Christ. And some people will exercise this manifestation of the Spirit in church, and others will exercise this manifestation of the Spirit at home, and others will exercise the manifestation of the Spirit at work. Because there is no sacred secular divide, because everything comes from God. So to each is given the manifestation of the Spirit. So I'm just trying to set everything in context before we go any further. Oh, this word. Oh, the word. Right. Is that the next one? If there are all these so-called spiritual gifts, how do we get them? How many are there? Do you get a fully loaded gift already, or do you just get an embryo and you have to work it out? If you get one given, is it permanent or is it just temporary? There are all kinds of questions. How does it relate to natural temperament and spiritual ability? There are lots of questions, but we haven't got time, unfortunately, about this series on the gifts of the Spirit. How do we get them? There's a tension between what I've said, sovereignty and responsibility. If you read the text in 1 Corinthians, it says the Holy Spirit gives the gifts as he wills, according to what he wants. All these are the works of the one and the same Spirit, and he gives them to each one just as he determines. So there is a sense of divine sovereignty to who gets what. On the other hand, we're also told to earnestly desire the spiritual gifts. So there's this tension between what we want and what God gives. And so it's not always straightforward. But we're told to want these spiritual gifts, and God gives according to what we need. Next one, please. So let's look specifically at speaking in tongues. Because obviously there are lots and lots of spiritual gifts, depending where you look in the Bible. Some people think there are 19, other people think there are 27. There are lots of times this word, charis, plural, charismata, is mentioned. Many people don't like to look at 1 Corinthians 7 in case they have the gift of celibacy. Not one of the spiritual gifts many people see. So there are all kinds of spiritual gifts. And this morning I've been asked to speak on speaking in tongues, but the word tongues is a bit misleading. It is the normal Greek word, the New Testament is written in Greek, the normal Greek word meaning languages. Speaking in languages. I don't know how many languages you speak. Most of you, like me, would just speak a one. Obviously, English is God's own language. The Bible was written in English. Jesus spoke in English. So therefore, obviously, most of us speak English. Other people will speak more than one language. My grandchildren are fluent in Portuguese because their mother is Brazilian, and so they speak one language to their mother and another language to their father, and Yorkshire to their grandparents. So I'm not quite sure what that, but just to try to remove all of it, it's just language, speaking in languages. So let's have a look. Next one, Martin, please. Can I suggest there are 3 different ways of understanding the gift of speaking in tongues? It happens 3 kinds of ways in the Bible, in the New Testament, and helpfully alliterated with the word pig. I've never knowingly undersold when it comes to alliteration. So the first one, Pentecost. The first time we hear the mention of speaking in tongues is the day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit is first given, and the crowd say, we hear them declaring the wonders of God in their own tongues. And it seems that speaking in tongues on this day of Pentecost was the ability to speak the language of the hearers. And if you read Acts chapter 2, there's about 14 different countries where they all came from, and so we hear them all speaking about the wonders of God in our own language. Now it seems to me that this was a one-off, unique gift of the Holy Spirit, unique to Pentecost. Unfortunately, if you want to be a missionary, you have to go and spend years learning the foreign language. There is no charismatic gift of languages where you pray, dear God, give me fluency in Chinese, and 10 seconds later you are fluent in Chinese and can go and live in China and work. You have to spend years learning it. But nevertheless, it seems in the New Testament there was this one-off gift of speaking in tongues where people were able to speak in a language and people heard them in their own language telling them about God. The next one, please, Martin. Secondly, there seems to be a public ministry of speaking in tongues in churches. When you come together, everyone has a hymn, a tongue, or an interpretation. Now, obviously, 1 Corinthians 14, we have to be careful of just parachuting into this chapter and reading off a sentence and then immediately applying it to us 21 centuries later in a different context and all the rest of it. None of the Bible was written to us. Okay, none of the Bible was written to us. We are eavesdropping on other people's conversations. It's letters between churches, so it's written in a particular context. It's like listening to 1 half of a telephone conversation. We don't know what those people have said. So we have to be careful. I'm just flagging that up because we can't all take 1 Corinthians 14 straight without various applications. So, he says, you must, if you do speaking in tongues, this language, 2 qualifications, and there they are. Edification and understanding. And irrespective of speaking in tongues, this is true for all kinds of Christian worship. Edification. It gives us the English word, edifice, a building. Edification means to be built up. So whatever spiritual gift we have, we need to make sure that what happens in our meeting, people will find helpful. That people will go away pleased that they came. They go away stronger, more confident, more understanding, encouraged in their Christian faith. If you go to church and you go away feeling worse than when you came in, and that has been known, then something is clearly wrong. But the aim of all spiritual gifts, all worship, all, in this particular this on speaking terms, it has to be, the end result needs to be that people feel built up in their Christian faith. But it's connected with this other one, understanding. We can only be built up in our faith on the basis of understanding. And when we understand more, that leads us to be being built up more. It's a circle. Now, please do not understand as being just merely a cerebral brain thing. That will be what syllabus, which we have to get through, and will be an exam at the end of your life, and this is the syllabus. And as long as you know the difference between Hosea and Zerubbabel, then you're in. Understanding is with the whole person, not just with the intellect. Although it involves the mind and the brain, it is not limited to the mind or the brain. If God has given you a good mind or brain, you are expected to use it to the full. Whether you are a thimble or a bucket, you can both be full. So we need to make sure we use all our God-given gifts in trying to understand And if what happens here isn't understandable, and in one Corinthians case it was because they were speaking in tongues, and people literally did not understand the word, it was double Dutch, then what's the point of coming? How is that helpful to me? Someone's jabbering away in the corner. How is that helpful to me? Answer, it isn't. Likewise, if someone stands up at the front and you are bored silly, you are not going to be built up in your faith. If they are speaking the language of Zion, Zionese, and you haven't learned the Zionese, or Evangelic, or whatever the language is, you will not be built up in your faith. We has to be language that people understand. So these two principles are very important. So there was a public ministry of speaking in tongues, where somebody would speak in tongues out loud, seemingly gibberish, and Paul says, well, that's no good. You have to have someone to be able to interpret it. The speaking in tongues bit was almost like a drawing attention. Hello, something's about to be said here. Attention, please. Attention. The speaking in tongues bit, and then somebody would come along, or perhaps the same person, the gift of interpretation, or someone else, would then give the gist of what was needed to be said. But it was the interpretation that's the key issue. Very important, because if you remember, the gifts of the Spirit are not badges of merit. Look how spiritual I am. I have this particular gift. Whether you realise or not, I don't know, but I do. Okay, they're nothing like that, because they're to the manifestation to the common good. So, next one. And thirdly, and finally, you'll be glad to know, it is a private practice. So, speaking tongues, if there is no interpreter, the speaker should keep quiet in church. I often say people should keep quiet in church. People should keep quiet in church and speak to himself and to God. And I'd like to unpack those last two phrases, to himself and to God, in a minute. But it's a personal ministry. Now, I'll come clean here. I speak in tongues. I have done so for the last 50 years. But always only as a private thing between me and God. I've never translated into Chinese or other languages. I've never stood up in church and started speaking tongues. That'd be so embarrassing. But I have found the gift of tongues helpful in my own personal walk with God. So next slide, please. Over 1,000 tongues. Good Wesley hymn. Expressing this whole idea of the use of the gift of tongues. Because sometimes we are quite perhaps lost in wonder, love, and praise, and often we don't know quite what to say. If it is God is truly present, then he will be what is called ineffable. I always thought that was something about swearing, but it's not. Ineffable is it is beyond words. It cannot be expressed in words. God is ineffable. And we try. Some people want to know if you've had a fantastic experience, naturally, when we first saw the Northern Lights. What was it like? When you talk about green lights and stuff, it doesn't give you justice. Because words are never enough, are they, to explain something. When you're falling in love with your partner, and someone says, well, why do you fall in love with them rather than that one? Well, the hair, the eye. Well, it's difficult, you can't put it precisely in words, because it's beyond words, isn't it? And likewise with God, God gives us words. So sometimes when we're praying, our mind can't cope, and so we speak in language, words that seem to bubble up, and whatever. No idea what I'm saying. But perhaps it helps me because I speak to God. Next one, please. Because often we can be lost for words. I'm often lost for words. Extreme. Some good friends of ours have died recently. What do you write on a card? No idea what to write on a card. All the things you could say, should be said. Lost for words, aren't we? Often I'm lost for words. I'm not quite what to say. Did I say the right thing? Did I not say whatever? But sometimes God in His goodness gives us the right words because it's a gift of His Spirit. Because we love God because He loves us. And God gives us the love with which to love Him. God's love is poured into our hearts by the Holy Spirit. The commandment is to love God. We know you can't command love because love is voluntary. You can't command things that are voluntary. So God gives us the love with which to love Him. And part of that can be the gift of tongues, where we're able to express that love in a personal way, nobody else around. He speaks to God and also to himself. Last one, please. We also express our own feelings because he speaks to himself and to God. And often we don't know what we ourselves think, do we? We're upset. And so I find myself expressing myself quietly in tongues, and I'm not really quite sure what I feel, how I feel, and all the rest of it. It's beyond words. And so that is what I understand the gift of the Holy Spirit to give shown in the speaking of tongues. If you look at the list in Paul, speaking in tongues often comes near the end. He said, I'd rather speak in 10,000 words, in 5 words to help the congregation than 10,000 words in a tongue. But nevertheless, this is the gift of the Holy Spirit that can help us in our love language for God, which I have found. It's helpful. Now, how do you start? I always remember 50 years ago at Bible college, I did go on this, to Bible college, a friend of mine went to a Pentecostal church. And in those days, speaking in tongues was quite controversial. And I remember being in a conversation with him. He said, how did you learn to speak in tongues? He said, well, in our Pentecostal denomination, we were told to say banana backwards 3 times. Now that strikes me as not very helpful. Banana backwards is anana. Sounds good. Say it 3 times and you're off. That is to say, our mind is perhaps disconnected and we just let our spirit say what seems to us as complete rubbish and gibberish. People might explain it psychologically, that it's a release from stress and strain and worry and anxiety. It might well be. I'm not fine about psychological explanations because that is precisely what it is, a psychological explanation, but not the whole explanation. And therefore we need to perhaps relax and let God work in us. In the name of Christ.